Okay, everybody's already seen that slide, so I shall move swiftly on. And I shall move past these slides fairly quickly because you'll be able to see them afterwards. So this gives you some of my idea of my background. Basically, decades in the IT world, but I've been involved with Access since the early betas. So onto the scenario. I have got a client that I've been doing some Access SQL work with, and at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I offered them pro bono work if they needed it for anything in order to help them cope with the pandemic, and spoke to them about PowerApps. Nothing happened for a couple of days, and then they got back to me and said, actually, yes, we do have an issue. And what it was they had a lot of staff changing where they were working from, whether they were isolating or working from home, and they had no means of collating this information easily. And also colleagues needed to know staff need to know where their colleagues were, because if they were expecting someone to be at one of the hospitals, they needed to know they weren't going to be. So we developed, after talking with them for about half an hour, we developed a version 1 app in just a few hours. Within 24 hours, we'd made a significant change, version 24 and version 2, and I've since offered it to community. Haven't really had any takers, but hopefully that might change today. So one of the key things I want to say about this is if this application is something that you think you could use for a client that's coping with the pandemic right now and wants to implement it, if you're not skilled with PowerApps, I'm more than happy to give you a couple of hours, which is probably all it'll take to get it up and running for that client, and do that via Teams or TeamViewer. If you'd like to use it, but it's not directly for the pandemic, I'll still offer that help for free, but I'd like a donation to UK charity Help for Heroes, which is something close to my heart.
Peter, Daniel from Canada asked if you could maximize the slides because you're in design mode of PowerPoint.
Yeah. Well,
it interrupts you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better.
Okay. Basically, we're going to be developing an app from the start. So this, want to emphasize, this isn't about moving away from Access. It's about extending the reach of your apps and your data to mobiles and tablets on iOS and Android. Hold on to your hats. Yes, this is going to be quite a fast ride, and I'm depending on the fact that the video will be available afterwards, and also that my offer to help if you actually want to implement this. To save time, I've already created the SharePoint list that I'm using, and I'm going to show you how I manage those from Access. Following Alex's talk earlier, this is a Canvas app. It's nothing to do with CDS, so it's completely independent of any of the premium licenses. This is something you can do with an Office 365 tenant for just business or enterprise. So I'm going to show the Access app very briefly, then I'll move to PowerApps and we'll build an app from the data upwards. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing this. I'm now going to share my Access app very briefly. So this is the Access app. I'll maximize it. We've got 3 linked lists here. So these are SharePoint lists. If you're not familiar with accessing them from Access, you connect to them via the URL and you get a slightly laggy table, and this is all the information you get from it. So I've created a very simple SharePoint list with titles and locations, and I won't bother showing the other 2 because I'll show you what happens here. So we've got a list of status values. So this is the status of an individual saying they're working from home, they're at the first hospital, the second hospital, something else, they're on leave or they're isolated, and I can add new. Similarly, departments have a title and a location, and I can add more of those. So it's all managed centrally from the within one of the hospitals. But the point of the Power App is that people can then self-declare their status. And in managing people, here's a list of people. It is not, this is data filled into the lists. And what I have done is created a very small app window where you can actually change it. So I can say I'm defaulting everything to first hospital. Yes. Everything goes through, and then I can change that to be I'm going to be isolated on Tuesday and I'm going to be working from home on Thursday for that one individual. So with that, I'm going to go back to my browser window if I find the right one. There we go. And I'm going to move on to the data. So just to give you a brief rundown of the data, this is a SharePoint site inside my Office 365 tenant. SharePoint comes in inverted commas free with Office 365, so I'm not consuming any extra licenses other than that which I already pay for Office. I'm a business premium customer. So in here I've got 3 lists: department, people, and person status, and that's the data you saw in the Access app. So That should look familiar, albeit from a brief look. That's a list of possible statuses someone can have. This list is a list of the departments in which they can work and where they're located. And then this list is the individuals. And you can see what we've got is, if you like, a friendly name, their department. Location is actually default location. Initially, when we wrote this, it was just to have a single location. So I left this in and it's now the default. Person name is effectively a match to Active Directory, which is your Office 365 tenant name. And then I've got the email address for that person as well. And then I've got 7 columns extending beyond the screen here, which is my status on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. So that's the basic data. What I'm going to do is show you the app as it's finished right now, and then we're going to build this very quickly, well within 40 minutes. So when it loads, you've seen something similar from Alex already, but this is a much more compact set of information. So what we've got in here is this area here, the gallery, is basically, think of it like a continuous form in Access. So we see some information about the individuals, and we've picked up that data about their status Monday to Sunday, and also default locations. Search tools are interesting. If I type in KE for Keith, I switch it on, and this searches for anything with KE in the name. This is important. You'll see there's a slight difference to the default behavior later, and this is, so Mike is picked up even though KE isn't the beginning of his name, unlike Kevin and Keith. If I switch that off and switch that off, I get everybody. If I switch it on, I just get my department. If I switch on First Hospital, I get just me. But you'll notice there's only one button, only one person has a button. So this has identified me by my friendly name here, matching my identity that's up here. If I click on Edit My Status, I go directly into an edit form. And at this point, I can change Monday to be working from home. The default location doesn't apply itself to the other 7 records, but that was a design choice when we did this. Click on tick to say I want to change that. It's worked okay. Go back to main screen. And now you can see here, I'm working from home on Monday. The other thing we did was add in access to the Outlook calendar for the user. In my instance, I've got 4 calendars in my Office 365 tenant, so I've just got to pick the one I'm using. And then this shows you my calendar. So happy birthday, Phil, who's not in this conference, I shouldn't think. But this allows me to look at what I'm doing during the course of the next few days, so I can work out what my status should be without having to leave the app. So on a phone, that's quite useful because you don't have to jump around between calendar and this. This had to be pretty quick. And that's the app. So how do we go about that? The way that was a Canvas app, and one of the things you can do within the SharePoint list is this feature here, PowerApps. So I can just click on here, create an app. Now this is the only point where we're going to get a fairly lengthy, for me anyway, wait. I'm going to make it. I've done quite a few tests earlier, so I think I'm up to 7 as the next one. So what this is doing, this is building what Canvas apps do as a sort of default behavior app. So you end up with a 3-screen environment. You get the first screen lists a continuous form in effect of all the records in the table that you're looking at. So I'm looking at the people table. It then gives you a arrow to click that takes you to display of all the detail on that particular user. And then if you choose to edit that, you then get the ability to edit the contents of that record. So this is quite promiscuous in that when it opens up, you have the ability to edit everybody's record. So you can go and change your mate status to something else. And in fact, when we get to it, you'll also see that the text you use is free text. It's not limited to the entries that we want to allow people to have. So if I run this app, this is a basic one. I can search for KE, but I'll only get Kevin and Keith because it's searching for the beginning of the name, not any part of it. And if I click on that arrow, there's the record of the individual uneditable. And then I click on the pen and I get to edit it. But here I could change Harry to Harry and I've changed the underlying record. So we don't want to allow that. And also, if we go back here, I've got the ability to delete the record, which again, we don't want. So it's time to start changing this. And one of the things I tend to do is immediately change the name. So over here, what we've got is this is the list of the screens we got. So you can see there was a screen there called the initial one, then there's a detail screen and an edit screen. So I like to number them just so I get a sense of what I'm working with, because it can get quite complex. And you see there's a whole load of objects in here. So think of this like a form in Access where you've got a list of all the objects. Over on the right hand side, you select here, you pick them up, and you can see when you identify an object, you get these handles around it. So I'm actually going to resize that because I need some space at the top of the screen. At times I do change these names, but I have to say I work very much with clicking on the objects to work with them. So it can be useful to change those names later on, but it's a dynamic change. So if you change the name of something, any reference to it will automatically change as well. So that's good. So I'm going to just grab that and move it out of the way because I'm going to do and make it smaller. And this is the first thing I'm going to do is you get with PowerApps, you get an app, general app, which has a run on start. Think of it as an auto exec macro. And for any object you select here, this is where you get the methods and actions and attributes that you can change. So I'm going to change the on start macro, and this is where I'm going to start doing my first copy paste, because otherwise it'll go horribly wrong. That little down arrow there gives you more information, so you can pull this out so you can see everything written. Now, if I click in there, you get red underlining, which hopefully you'll realize means there's a mistake here somewhere, but not until later on. So each command here is separated by a semicolon. And what I'm doing here, I'm setting a global value called app title with the value DevCon 7. I'm grabbing the user's name and the user email from this is the user they use to authenticate when they use the app. So when you install PowerApps on your device, you then start it, you authenticate using your Office 365 tenant, and so those attributes are available to me to use. But there's one here that I haven't got. And to do that, there's an extra data source connection I need. So like connecting to a SQL Server or any other database, something like that. So you click on this rather old-fashioned disk icon. And if I type in Office, or start typing Office, you can see I've got Office 365 users. So this is like a connection into the user object in Office 365. And all I need to do is click Connect, and that hooks me up to the information about Office 365 users. And in my instance, it's picking me up. I'm grabbing my profile, I'm picking my department. So that's all from within Azure AD, which is all part of Office 365. You'll also notice then there's another mistake here, error, and this is a function that I'm doing. That table of statuses is something I use multiple times. So rather than dynamically connected over the internet, I load it into local table, which is local person status. That's the name, but I'm connecting to that table person status. But if you look here, it's not listed as my data entity. So I'm going to add a connection to SharePoint. And in order to do that, I'm going to connect directly to my cloud one. So you can see here, you can connect to on-premise SharePoint. And this is where I need the site content. So this is the list of everything in that particular site. So there are the three lists. And if I go back to the app that I'm developing, paste that in and connect to that site, you can now see I've got department and person status as lists to which I can connect. Think of them as tables. And if I do that, I don't know whether this is a bug or a design concern, but you can see it's called person status underscore 1, which doesn't match here. So I've still got an error. But because it's underlined, I can see down here, it's actually offering me person 1 status as an possible answer to it. And that's now fixed it, and I've got no errors. Once you have no errors, this format text lights up. And that's so if I did something like this to reformat it, if I click on format text, it reformats it into what it considers to be the right way of laying things out. So I've now got my app start and it's creating my global variable called app title, grabbing some values, and then loading a local table of statuses that I can use later. So the first thing I'm going to do is here, this title is hard-coded to people. You can see where at the top where I'm going to change. If I change that to app title, and again, you can see it prompting me for a value, but it's empty, nothing happens. And the reason for that is my startup hasn't run, and I do it like that. click on the ellipsis, run on startup. So now I've got that variable loaded. And I can also see that collection I created, the local table. Here it is. And whilst it's a complex set of columns, there's the column that I'm interested in, the location column that I'm going to use. So if I switch back to the app. So now we've got a number of things, but one of them is this plus here is still in the system. And that is the ability to add a new record into my person table, which I don't want to do. If I delete it, I then get some errors. You can see some errors marked here. And you also see this stethoscope with some dots in it. And what's happened there is that the default app uses, it lays things out using the widths of different items. So you can see here, that thing was actually called icon new item. So this formula for the exposition of one of my icons doesn't work. If I remove that reference and you can click on those elite bar, you can see it's underlined again. I'm using the width of an icon that doesn't exist anymore. So I remove that. And hopefully this is the last one. Icon new item width is bad. That's good. I've got no more red marks. My stethoscope's clean. So I'm ready to go. So they can't add a new record. So now I'm going to do some cut and paste because there's quite a few objects here to grab. So excuse me while I just do that on another screen. And this is a useful technique. If you've got an existing app, you can do this cut and paste routine between them, and I get all the objects. So that should look familiar from the example I briefly gave you. And I've got some more red markers. If I click on the down arrow, edit in the formula bar, this is a similar problem to start off. It's the fact that the data came in, the department table is actually called department_1. I pick that up. This is the main frustrating thing I find with PowerApps, and I've got to clear that, collapse it to go back to this error. And that one was person status 1. There's also some layout issues here. I'm just going to move that across and that across. And I want to move my search bar back here. Right. So I'm now going to move that gallery back. So that's the top laid out, but obviously the information on this, in this gallery, the continuous form, is still based on, if I look at items, it's this. Now it was quite intimidating when this first started because it's so different from a select statement in T-SQL. But essentially what we've got is sort by the columns, and then this bit here is the select statement. So I'm filtering the people table by anything that's where the title starts with what's in my search box. So that's the select statement in effect. And then the sort by column saying I'm sorting by title, and this is the sort by indication. So that sort descending is set by this up and down arrow. And if it's true, it's descending. If it's false, it's ascending. So it has some relationship to a T-SQL select statement, but it's a bit difficult to get used to. Certainly that's what I found when I first started doing this. So what I'm going to do is change it for my one that does what I want it to do, and just cut and paste it in here. And this will look quite intimidating at first, and there will be some errors. The first error is this underlining here that tells me, and you can see format text down here is not available to me. So people search, that is because my box is called text search. So if I rename that, if I type it correctly, people search now works, and I've got format text back. So again, this is effectively the select statement, but what I'm doing here is a set of nested ifs. So I've got 4, or is it 5, possible filter statements that get used. So the ifs are evaluated in turn, And whichever one is the one that fits the selections I made at the top with those on and off buttons, it gives me the data I want in my form. So I'm changing the select statement for the continuous form, if you like. So if I'm selecting by, if the search value, that search value is the on-off button. So if it's true, the value of it is true, I will filter people by where the search text is in the person name. So this is where the KE brings up Mike. So I've said in rather than begins with. If it's not that, then if I'm filtering by department and filtering by location, I get this more complicated filter, which is filter the people where the department is what I want and the location is what I want. So select department. You can see from the color coding here, select department is this drop down here, and there's the on off to say it's true. If I'm not selecting, so if filter by location is false, I get filter people just by department. And then if filter by department here was false, I'm doing this evaluation. And that's saying if filter by location is on, filter that, otherwise filter people. This is not the most complicated filtering I've had for this. We've got one installation which actually takes up 1.5 times the space available on the screen. But it looks like it might be highly inefficient. That's not been experienced because the if statements are all evaluated and kind of instantaneously, it feels, and you end up with just one filter statement that gives you the data that you want. So we haven't had a problem with having tremendously complex versions of that. So now I'm down to these 3 records that I'm met by. If I play this, you can see that these are now working. And if I switch on filtering and type in KE, I get my 3 users again. So Mike with KE in it and Kevin and Keith that start with it. So that's good. But now my continuous subform hasn't got anything that I actually want in it. And you'll notice if I click on the gallery, as it's called, the whole of the continuous form, I just get the form. I'm going to move that up because I'm going to change this later. But if I click in the first record, this is like working in layout mode where you can actually edit the first instance and all the other instances will change. So I'm going to do another batch delete and get rid of everything and then cut and paste from another app everything I need to make this work. Excuse me, there's about 20 objects to grab, so there's a few clicks to make. I'll be with you very shortly. So another slight pause while it pastes in all those objects, and there we go. So I can squeeze it up to the top. Because I didn't resize the area first, these have got cramped up, so I'm just going to bring those down. And you'll see you now get these purple dotted alignment markers, which is pretty useful. So it's a snap to grid kind of feel to things. And if I run the app now, I can see everything is as it should be. That's what I wanted to see. My department, my default location, and then my locations for 7 days, and the same for the other people who match the search criteria. But if I click on that, I go back to my display form, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to collapse these. So this gallery, which is, if you like, the continuous form, has an attribute of on select. So what it means is when I select an item from there, however I enable myself to do that. So you can think of it an on-click event. It navigates to the detail screen, and I don't want it to do that. I want it to go to the edit screen. So if I type in edit, if I overtype edit, be offered the edit screen. If I type it in full, there we go. Screen transition is just, you've got options fade, cover. In my experience, this works so quickly, I don't see the difference between the transitions, but I guess if you're running on a very slow 3G signal, you might. And I'll just show you what happens if I now rename that to screen to edit. If I come back here to the gallery, you can see now it says navigate to screen to edit. So all those changes just flow through anywhere they're used. So that it makes life an awful lot easier. A bit like autocorrect in autocorrect tracking. I can't remember what it's quite called in Access. Someone could put that in the chat. So if I now run this and click on this button, I now get my editing function. I've gone direct to it. But I can also do that for someone other than me, which I don't want to do. So my next step is to delete that, and now I can't select anything. And then I'm going to grab that button and place it over here. And at this point, there is an error in the formula for it, and that's because the name of the form is wrong. If you notice, I called it screen to edit. If I change that to screen to edit, the error magically disappears, and I'm back to good. Now the thing is, as you can see, it's only shown on the first record, and let me show you how it does that. There's an attribute that you can set for most objects called visible. And what I've done here, I've just said, remember I created a variable called user's name when I start up the app, which I grab. What I'm doing is saying, if this item, which is this record in the continuous form, if the person name for that value, which is this thing at the top left, PJ Bryant, equals the username global variable, then visible is true, otherwise it's false. So now I'm only showing that button for me and no one else. So if I run that, if, for instance, I search for KE, no, I can't change anything, but I can see everybody with KE in their name. If I switch that off, I can now click on Edit My Status, and it goes to my form, ready for me to edit. But I've still got all this horrible ability to overwrite and use invalid values. So that's the next challenge. So what do we do here? This is an object called an edit form. So you've got a number of columns from your, if you imagine you've got a select splat from the table, you've got all the columns here, but not, you've got some of the columns here, and it's randomly associated the ones that it's going to let you use. So you can change that. But the first thing I'm going to do to give myself some more screen space is change the layout from vertical to horizontal. And now all of that fits on. My next step is to actually show the fields, is to actually put the fields on that I want to see. So I'm not worried about the person's name, so I can remove that. I'm not worried about the person's status, remove that. And I'm actually not worried about the email. But what I do want is the other dates, Wednesday onwards. And unfortunately, this isn't in the column order on the system, it's in alphabetical order. So you have to do a little bit of tidying up as well. And there we go, they're all added. But I've still got the problem, firstly of layout, and then of being able to edit anything. So the next step I'm going to do this, there will be, let's expand that. You've got an edit text type. That's what it is. That means I can freely edit the field. But what I can do is say, I want a drop down. Now, when I do this, we'll get some errors because I haven't told it where it's going to get those values from, but you need to change that first and then do everything else. I've also found that under certain circumstances, you end up with an inability to edit this. So I'm doing all of them now so I don't get into that trap. It's probably a bug, but I haven't reported it. And I want to do this for location because remember, location is my default. So we now have drop downs everywhere, but the data doesn't work. And one other change I want to make will be to change title and department so they shouldn't be editable by the user. So we'll make those read only shortly. But first of all, what we're going to do is just change how this works. So I've got a drop down, and by default, it's the value items in there are parent allowed values. And if you imagine you have in Access where you can say you can allow Fred, Bert and Sid as valid values, it's the same kind of thinking. But what I want to be able to do is use it from my table of valid values. So if I go into the advanced tab here, so these are the properties of that thing that I've highlighted. It's locked, I can't change it. So the first thing to do is unlock it. The next step is to declare where those things come from. Now you remember loaded the person status into a local table, and this is where I'm consuming it because I don't want to go off over the internet for the value. So I'm going to my local person status, and I'm grabbing the column called location. I don't yet quite understand it, but I have to change that as well. That now gives me, you can see the first hospital, but I've still got an error. And the reason for that is if I edit that in the formula bar, the column isn't called value, it's called location. So if I change that, that error's gone. So I'm just going to do the same for all of these. Unlock, change that, select location. If Alex is watching, if there's a quick way to do this, I'd appreciate you letting me know after the presentation's finished. So bear with me while I do the remaining few. As you can see, while I'm doing this, I've actually still not changed any of the names of anything here because it just hasn't been necessary. It's so graphically based that I can just click and point and work on things that I want to. The time when you might want to do that is when you get so many multiple objects to deal with. And also, if you've got objects that you can hide, if they're temporarily hidden, you can't select them. So I've now got these errors to solve, which is just a matter of changing that value to the column name, which is location. I'll copy that and then I'll do this. So we're now getting quite close to a working app. More steps. One more. What I haven't done is change the sort order. So the thing's in the wrong way around. So I'll select that object again. If I edit the fields, I can actually drag and drop. So I want Thursday before Friday, and I want Wednesday before Thursday. And for some reason, the location's moved, so I'll move that right up the top. And the last thing I want to do on this form, I think, is I don't want to be able to edit these things, so I'll make them view. So where I could pick a drop down, I'll now change this to view, and you can see how it's changed. It's a display any field. So if I now run the app again from the first screen, go to edit my status, brings up the form, and now there we go. I can say I'm on leave in general and I'm isolated on Monday. If I've done it all right, I click that, it's made those changes for me. So that's great, but there is a possibility of things not quite working. And what we can do is use another facility that Microsoft wrapped in, which is I can add in a screen. So there's some standard templates here, and you can see there's a success screen. I'll just rename it, almost standard. So how do I do that? This tick just says submit the form. It doesn't tell me to go anywhere, but what the edit form does, which is this editable, think of it as the details on a form, that has a couple of attributes as well. It says on success, and at the moment it's programmed to go to back. So what that's doing is going back a form to the main menu. So I can change that behavior, and I can say navigate screen 4, I think it was. Scroll down the list. Screen 3 success. Fade in. And now if I can run the app just from this point and click the tick, I get to success. So the user's now got some positive feedback, it worked. And we know that is because it's a response to the successful writing of the record, but I can't go anywhere from here. So what we need to do is do something to get them back. And the way I've handled that is, if you bear with me just a mo, is another cut and paste. You can see here on select says when I on select is the equivalent of on click. So when I click there, false means do nothing. So I'm going to change that to this. And I've got some errors here because of the names that I've chosen for objects, but now that's all fixed. So what this says now is, firstly, navigate to the home form again. Secondly, refresh my database of people. So I've written the records back. I'm now going to refresh the display. So if anybody else has changed their statuses in the meantime, I'll see those immediately. And the last thing I did was perhaps unnecessary, but because I've loaded that local table with the possible statuses, if someone in the central office has added a new status, this will refresh my local list, pardon me, so it'll be available to them immediately. So if I run this form now and click on there, I'm now back to my form and I know I've refreshed my collection. So we've now got pretty much close to a working form. Well, what if it fails? Well, I can right click and duplicate that screen, and you'll notice it just attaches an _1 to the end of everything. I'm going to make it a failure. And this form, so I can double click in there, failed, but I don't want a tick. If I go to that, you'll notice first of all that it actually has the same code behind that button, so I don't need to do anything there. But over here, if I click on the drop down, I can select a different icon. And scrolling down, I'll pick the sad face. And I can now play that screen, click on there, and I'm back to my form. So I've now got a behavior pattern for whether it works or fails. You might change that message to say contact the other user or put other information on that screen to help them. But we've now pretty much got everything that the app does, but we haven't got that calendar. And this is now another feature that Microsoft offer, which is on the new screen. I can actually put in a calendar form screen, and it does it all for me. So think of it like a wizard. I'll rename it again. So now I need to navigate to that, and I want to do that from here. So I can pick a button here, so much like the design tools in Access, drag it down to the bottom. Over here is the text that appears on it, calendar, and I need to tell it what to do. And I just wanted to navigate to screen, I'm going to scroll down, screen 5 calendar, fade, bingo. Click on play, click on calendar, there's the form. I won't populate it because that'll take some time. But what I haven't got here is the ability to go anywhere from this form. There's no controls here. There are no controls here to allow me to do that. So I'm going to insert an icon, and I'll choose you can see there's plenty of choice here. I'm going to choose the back icon, stick it up on the top right hand corner. You've got color schemes here to change. So I'll pick white so it fits better on the screen, and I need to do something with it, and that's navigate again. Screen 1, 8. Now my app's ready to go. If I play that, it takes me back to the first screen. So I've got one more button I want to put on the form, and that's to close it. Insert the button, change the text, close, and in this instance, exit I think is the function. Yes, exit. And so think of the quit application. But this has an interesting Boolean option here, and it allows you to control your security to a degree. So what you can force here is if I say false, it means that the application will close, but the user will stay logged into PowerApps. So if they go into they won't need to re-authenticate to reuse this app. So that's, I think, a useful adjunct. If it's a more secure app, I don't say banking, but if it was more secure, you can make that true, so they're then forced to authenticate each time they run the app. I've just realized that screen I'm not using anymore, so I'm going to delete that and hopefully get no errors. Yes. And on the edit screen, I'm just going to change that from hard text to people to app title. This way, if I change you saw here that I've got the title here, I could call it DevCon. Maybe I should call it DevCon 3. I'll make it 9. If I just run that on startup, You can see now it's changed the title on that screen and that screen. So you've got some consistency here, and you can change the app. Now, there is one thing here that sort of discordant. If you notice, I've got different colors because cut and pasted from another app. If I go to home, Microsoft have got a nice theme thing going here, so I can change it. And whilst this might seem trivial and it actually fails to show, it doesn't fully refresh. I think this is a bug, but I can get past that in a moment. This I find enormously useful because my methodology with PowerApps is to do, if we want to make some changes, you can save the app as under a different name, change the app title, as I've just shown you, and also change the color theme. So if you're testing with users, you can say, are you using the red or the green one? Or maybe not that because they're colorblind, say the red or the blue. And that enables you to instantly get feedback on which version they're using, because very often if you ask a user, are you using version 8 or version 9? The answer will be, I don't know, even if you put it in the app title. Whereas if you say, is it red or blue, you'll get an answer pretty quickly. So whilst that hasn't fully recolored everything, it will. I'll show you shortly that it has. And I've just realized one thing, I need to drag that down so I use all the space I've got. The other thing, notice I've left some white space on the right here because there will be a scroll bar when this has got more records than can fit on a screen. The last thing to show you, I've got a yellow triangle here. This is a delegation warning. What this is a feature with some data sources, and SharePoint is one of them, where you're limited to the number of records you can load. And I'll show you in a moment where the limit is set is to 500, and it can be increased to 2,000. The hospitalized working actually had 2 hospitals of about 1,800 staff. So we were looking at a limit of 1,800. We couldn't breach that 2,000 limit. That's a hard limit from Microsoft. So if you have a delegation limit, and it's set, let's say we set it to 100, if you then run this app with 150 records, it will only pull the first 100 back. And this is where you start seeing some penalties of using SharePoint as a data source. If you're using SQL, that doesn't exist because you can delegate the selection criteria to the back end. A bit like doing a stored procedure call with a data set. So you might have to manage around it, but because this was a quick and dirty get it running for them, we elected to have 2 versions of the app, one for each site, but everybody could use either app and get all the information they needed. But you'll always get a warning here to warn you that you sometimes can't delegate the selection criteria or filtering to the back end. It brings all the data through and then filters it in line for you. So that can be a performance penalty, but we haven't seen that as a big issue on any of the apps I've gone live with. The limit is 500 by default for SharePoint, and you can change it to 5. You can change it to 2,000 safely. But now I've finished the app, even though the coloring hasn't worked properly, we need to save it. And you just click on File Save, unsurprisingly. But this is all saved in the cloud and it's ready to go, but it's still only available to you. What you first need to do is publish it. And this basically puts it into the application list in the portal for people to find when they run PowerApps. So if I just click on that, it'll publish it. And the last thing is security. If I click on Share, it brings up another window. And here's the opportunity. So if I type in PJB, I've got enough. I can give permissions to my alter ego, Peter Bryant, rather than P Bryant, and that means that person will get the application listed when they open PowerApps. Anybody who's not in this, doesn't have these permissions, will not be able to run the app full stop. And in addition, you can also make them a co-owner, which means they can edit and share it, but they're not allowed to delete it or change the ownership. So it means you've given the ability to someone to break your app in record time, but at least they can't delete it. And then here you can see the permissions that are needed to run this app. So I'm not going to bother doing that because I'm not going to demonstrate it. Just got those changes. So there we go. That app is now finished. And if I go back to my list of PowerApps, now you can now see when the refresh finishes, I've now got, oh, Devon 7, I missed. What a silly typo. So if I now play that app, this is the sort of experience. I'm asked for permissions to access those users and Outlook tools that I had, which I just allow. And you can see it has correctly color coded it. If I edit my status, tick that, successfully completed. I can go to my calendar. I can pick my calendar. I can go back to the main form. I can close the app. And that's it. So we've gone from nothing, well, the data and an app, And that's it. Thank you very much. Back to you, Carl, for any questions anybody wants to throw at me. I'll leave the screen on display in case I need to show something.
I actually think most of the questions have already been answered by Alex in.
Well done, Alex.
If some questions are left, you can turn on your mic for 2 or 3 minutes. Are there any questions left that Peter didn't answer in his presentation? I think it was
Ben had a question regarding the back button on the Android app. So if you click the back button on the Android app, it will exit the mobile application. It will not navigate back.
No, it's not a navigation tool within PowerApps. You have to have the buttons on the screen. Yes.
But does it completely close your app? That means you have to start over again?
Well, no. When you do it, it then says, do you want to close this app? Yes or no. So you can cancel that, and you stay in the app. So there is a get out of jail option at that point.
Good.
Peter, how many users do you actually have? All these 1,800 that you mentioned, or many do you?
Well, they're currently still thinking about it. They did an implementation. They saw it and they liked it. But in the meantime, another team within the infrastructure at the hospital actually said, let's try something in Teams. So it got parked a while. But I haven't got any apps using that sort of volume of users. My general area is sort of in the sort of up to 100 without any issues. All using SharePoint lists because they effectively come free within your standard Office 365 tenant. But there are plenty of apps out there using high volumes. It's a bit disappointing, but what we're discovering is the bureaucracy within the health service in the UK is sometimes a bit sclerotic. So it's taking a lot longer to get it live. I had it with them and ready to go within 24 hours, and it's been a little while since, and they've not yet pushed the button, but we're ready to go.
And how's performance with SharePoint as backend?
Performance has been fine. I mean, the performance you saw with me running it here is typical of what you'd expect. I mean, if 2,000 users hit it simultaneously, yes, you might start to see some issues. But in practice, because of the nature of the app, most people they get a form, they spend some time filling it, and then they commit. So the I/O is relatively limited. And that technique of using a local table for data reduces that workload significantly. So there's an initial load when you start up of getting the basic data, but then it's pretty snappy thereafter.
Okay, Peter, I think we're done. There is some applause in the chat for you. Very impressive, very understandable what you did. As far as we... Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Let's have a break.
Yeah, I need it. Oh, and don't forget the offer. Genuinely, if somebody wants to grab me for an hour or two to implement this, feel free. Get in touch.